Thank goodness that Rob fellow returned all my kit. I've got my uniforms back and my kit back. And now there's no way the sergeant's going to send me to the cookhouse again.
Mackenzie. Sergeant, you'll be happy to know I've got all my kit today. Every last bit. Haven't forgotten a single piece. Well, you may not have forgotten any of your full dress today. But let me tell you something. You certainly have forgotten one key point. That we're leaving for India this afternoon. Where's your foreign service kit? I know, Sergeant. I know. Cookhouse. Potatoes. Well, you're right about the potatoes. But have you ever been in the galley of a troop ship? Oh no.
In Part 3, we reviewed personal equipment used until the early 1870s, as well as some general issue items. In Part 4, we'll discuss the 1871 and the 1882 valise equipment. The lot of the infantryman has always been hard. Carrying sometimes heavy weights for long distances was and always will be part of his job. In the early 1870s, efforts were made to ease the strain and discomfort caused by the ill-balanced parts of his existing equipment. This new type of equipment replaced the stiffened box knapsack with a soft valise, and expanded on the idea of decentralizing ammunition carriage, begun by the adoption of the ball bag or expense pouch in the late 1850s. Thus, nearly 200 years of load carriage came to an end, and what became known as valise equipment ushered in a new era. Coinciding with the pending issue of the Martini Henry in the early 1870s, a new type of equipment was developed, trialed, and issued. It was a departure from the pouch belt and knapsack arrangement that had been used for generations before. At its core was a waist belt and a set of braces to suspend the fighting load of the infantryman and distribute its weight about the body. Early on, it was used with Snider-armed battalions, with the issue of a curious ventral pouch. Very little evidence of this arrangement is left, but glimpses can be had. Certainly, it was one of those curious features of a very transitional early 1870s. The earlier hybrid Snider version was soon relegated to history, and the now familiar arrangement of pouches became ubiquitous. Initially, the ammunition pouches were black, but later they were changed to buff leather and whitened accordingly. Both patterns held 20 rounds in packets, and the balance of the soldier's 70-round allotment was carried in a ball bag or bag ammunition, as it was officially known. This could also be known as an expense pouch. In this, it was intended to keep loose rounds for immediate use. Opinions vary on actual distribution, but the pouch will easily hold 30 rounds, if that makes it a bit on the clumsy side. Next to the waist belt, the most important feature of the set were the braces, looped over the shoulders, then to the brace rings. They formed the vehicle to bear weight from the ammunition pouches and expense pouch, as well as the greatcoat, valise, and mess tin. The set was designed with previous forms of warfare in mind, namely that a man would carry all his belongings with him into battle. This, of course, would entail the carrying of the valise. Indeed, at home, this philosophy would seem to be most common. But warfare of the late Victorian era, in remote parts of the world, would quickly see the valise relegated to unit transport, thus relieving the men of its burden. Although one can find images of the full set being used on home service, it is very difficult to find similar ones on active service. And those are typically illustrations of units in transit from one station to another and not conducting field operations. For these, the most that was commonly carried was the greatcoat, and sometimes not even that, leaving the men with a stripped-down set of equipment that today might be termed fighting order, versus the marching order, as the full set was termed. This would continue to be the trend until the Great War, when the army again took to the field wearing the valise. Incidentally, this type of equipment wasn't generally adopted in Canada. The old pouch belt equipment serving until the 1890s, along with the Snider rifle. But in the early 1890s, a small section of the Canadian militia, known as the Infantry School Corps, were armed with Martini Henrys and initial patterns of the 1871 valise equipment. The 71 valise equipment had many parts, and assembling it required a certain degree of attention. It consisted of a waist belt, a bayonet frog, 2 ammunition pouches, a bag ammunition or expense pouch, a pair of braces left and right, a pair of greatcoat straps, a pair of valise straps, a valise, the mess tin, and the greatcoat. Assembly of this set was somewhat convoluted, especially when you consider later types of equipment that tended to form one piece when completely assembled. First, the frog was placed on the belt so as to sit on the left hip. Next, the brass D-rings were withdrawn from their sockets astride the belt buckle. Then the ammunition pouches were slid on either side. I have taken to placing the inside strap of the ammunition pouch through the D-ring. This ensures the pouch does not slide up and down the belt, as well as directly transfers the weight of the ammunition within to the braces when they are fixed. Once the belt was assembled, the remainder of the set could then be dealt with. The braces, left and right, were laid out and attached to each other with the stud located at the appropriate spot. Thus, the two were joined. Now it's important that the long, narrow straps with the buckles attached to the brace ring point to the inside for correct orientation of the braces. Next, the valise was positioned and the brace ends were buckled at the appropriate point to its upper edge through the attached buckles. Then the ends of the braces were attached to the buckle of the opposite brace, thus completing the figure of 8 pattern the braces form. The valise straps were then fastened to the brace ring, as well as to the bottom of the valise. Here, from another angle. Thus, the braces became the shoulder straps for what was essentially a very low-slung backpack. The mess tin was then fitted to the top of the valise. Early patterns had the mess tin attached to the upper face of the valise. This was changed with the addition of a strap permanently sewn to the top for this purpose. Following on, the greatcoat straps were fitted. The braces were provided with sleeves fixed to the inner surface, through which the greatcoat straps were fed, wrapping around the brace in the process to ensure they didn't slip. Original examples of braces have similar sleeves on the narrow portion of the brace as well. My set does not, but I find that they are not required. What is required is to have the greatcoat straps pass under the lower portion of the braces, however. The greatcoat, rolled or rather folded, 7 or 8 inches high by 16 inches wide, was then buckled to the braces with the valise straps. The ends of the straps rolled for neatness. Typically, the Glengarry, by then the universally issued forage cap for the entire army, was tucked into the straps for easy access. Assembled this way, the valise with mess tin and greatcoat became one unit, rather like a complicated backpack. To fasten the assembly to the belt, the narrow straps extending from the brace rings were fed through the D-rings found on the front edge of the belt. They were adjusted accordingly. The expense pouch was fitted to the right side brace ring by passing it underneath the belt, threading it through the ring and back to itself, buckling it at the appropriate height so that it hung slightly below the belt. Finally, the bayonet was placed in the frog. It's important to realize that the 1871, as well as its later cousin, the 82 pattern equipment, was not quite in its complete form, strictly a one-piece set. As it pertains to donning and doffing, it would seem very much that the intent was to treat the waist belt and the braces with the attached valise as two separate components, to be joined once worn, and not the one-piece affair, like the later Slade Wallace and 1908 pattern equipment sets would be. In this demonstration, we see the concept in practice. The waist belt, already worn with the ammunition pouches and bayonet attached, is mated with the valise and braces only after the latter has been donned. Some adjustment needs to happen in order to get the expense pouch properly positioned underneath the belt, but once this is done and the belt buckle reattached, the braces can then be attached to the waist belt at the front, thereby completing the set and fully supporting the weight of the ammunition at the front of the belt. Thus the complete set was assembled. When full, it was well balanced and reasonably ergonomic. The weight of the valise, greatcoat, and mess tin was offset by the ammunition carried at the front of the belt. It was, however, quite complicated, and care had to be taken to ensure the straps were fastened at the correct points for the wearer. Although advanced over previous models, it was not the acme of design. Changing components or orders of dress required the removal of the whole set, and a major reconfiguration of the braces and buckles when needed. Now, the man would undoubtedly have been very familiar with where to fasten the buckles for the many orders of dress possible with the set. As mentioned, the complete set, with the addition of the haversack and water bottle, was known as marching order, shown here. Note how the strap of the water bottle was passed through one of the buckles on the side of the valise to keep it out of the way. There were many ways to wear the equipment exhibited in the manual, and invariably on active service, variations were used. One such was the use of all but the valise. Perhaps termed light marching order, the braces were undone, the valise and its straps removed, and the braces then reattached under the arms, the braces still functioning to carry the greatcoat and support the ammunition pouches. The mess tin could be strapped to the greatcoat, or as shown here, strapped to the back of the belt. Another version, lighter still, was the omission of the greatcoat. The mess tin could be strapped to the joint in the braces, and the expense pouch left where it was on the right-hand side, or, as shown here, buckled to the back of the belt. The most simple order was drill order, where just one pouch was worn on the right side and the bayonet on the left hip. My set of 71 valise equipment came originally from IMA. There were many details regarding quality and fitting that I was not happy with, so I made or modified the parts I wanted to change. This included, of course, the valise, which wasn't initially included with the set. It appears that IMA have not stocked this set for quite some time, as their website currently shows it being sold out. There are other vendors, however, and some do better job than others. Military History Workshop from the UK is one of the better ones. More details about the set and modifications made can be found in an earlier video on the subject. It's from quite a few years ago, and the quality does not match up to current standards. Sorry about that. It also does not cover the addition of the valise. Perhaps it's time for an update. By the late 1870s, efforts were being made to upgrade the personal equipment of the infantry. This would result in the 1882 pattern valise equipment. Its design bore heavily on the concepts laid out with the 1871 set, but changes to the design would result in an incremental improvement. It was found that the combination of ammo pouches and expense pouch, as found in the 71 pattern set, could be ungainly. It was also felt that the low position of the valise subjected the wearer to excessive movement, although in my use of the full set, this is yet to be an issue. In addition, when used in a lighter order, the 1871 equipment could be rather ad hoc, with items festooned about the body, sometimes without the load-carrying support that would have made it more comfortable. These aspects were addressed with the new set of equipment. The expense pouch was discontinued. The ammo pouch system was simplified into a set of 2 large pouches, each holding up to 40 rounds. The greatcoat was moved to inside the valise, and this allowed for its placement higher on the back, in a more stable and somewhat more military position. The water bottle, still the Italian pattern, was modified to include a spring clip so that it could be secured to the belt instead of being slung across the chest. Although when the valise was worn, the braces were arranged in a similar fashion to the 71 equipment. When the valise was not worn, the 82 set offered a novel and advanced feature. By incorporating 2 brass D-rings at the rear of the belt, the braces could be fed through them before being fixed to the brace rings, now provided with their own integral buckle. With the rear of the belt now tied into the weight-bearing capabilities of the braces, a meaningful and secure load could then be placed at the rear of the set. This took the form of the rolled greatcoat and mess tin. Secured thus, the set became a single unit that could be donned and doffed like a waistcoat. Now this is something that's taken for granted today, but in the 1880s this was a very novel feature indeed. The new water bottle arrangement was found early on to be not quite as functional as intended. A reversion to the older slung style was effected quickly. So the 82 set provided an incremental improvement in stability and functionality. Assembly of the 82 pattern set followed similar practices to that of the 71. The set consisted of a waist belt, a frog, 2 identical ammunition pouches, a pair of braces left and right, a pair of greatcoat/mess tin straps, 2 valise straps, the valise, and the mess tin. The greatcoat was carried inside the valise with this pattern of equipment. Not shown is a brace attachment, peculiar to this pattern of equipment. This allowed the equipment to be worn with only one pouch, and still have the braces attached to the front of the belt. First, the frog was positioned as to hang at the left hip. Then, the ammunition pouches were slid onto either end. Next, the braces were fixed to the valise. Unlike the 71 set, the braces were not joined in the middle with the stud, but they did cross over each other in a similar way. The right-hand brace was fixed to the left-hand buckle of the valise. The brace end was fed through the buckle, fixed at the appropriate point, and then fed through a second brass D-ring on the inner face of the valise, fitted for this purpose. Of course, the same procedure was followed for the opposite brace. The ends of the braces were then buckled to the brace ring of the opposite brace. With this set, the brace ring had its own integral buckle. Thus fastened, the braces, much like they had done with the 71 set, formed a figure of 8. The valise straps were then fitted. You will at once notice the similarities in concept with the 71 valise. The actual parts, however, are completely different, with different construction. They were fed through the brace ring, buckled to themselves, and then to the bottom of the valise at the appropriate point. The ends were rolled for neatness. Next, the mess tin was fitted. By combining the greatcoat straps, they were able to reach around the valise and mess tin, thus securing the two together. This step was slightly awkward, as the straps had to be fitted individually to the front and back before being joined and passed around the mess tin. There were loops provided on the flap of the valise, the back of the valise, as well as on the mess tin cover for this purpose. The ends were rolled or tucked away for neatness. Thus the braces and the valise formed a single unit, much like a modern, if complicated, backpack. To attach the braces to the belt, the ends of the pouch straps were fed through the loop on the top of the ammunition pouches and buckled at the appropriate point. Finally, the bayonet was fitted in the frog, and the retaining strap secured. To assemble the set without the valise, the following procedure was used. First, the braces were fixed to the ammunition pouches using the adjustable straps. Then, each brace was fed in sequence through the opposite D-ring found at the back of the belt, then through the brace ring of the opposite brace, using the buckle that was integral to the brace ring. This way, the braces were incorporated into the back of the belt, a feature that was not possible with the 71 set. Although not strictly required for use, the greatcoat straps were provided with an integral loop to fit over the belt to prevent the greatcoat strap from sliding around. Once these straps were in place, the rolled greatcoat could then be strapped to the back of the belt. In a fairly simple operation, the greatcoat straps were simply buckled around the greatcoat with the ends rolled for neatness. Once this was complete, the valise straps were then buckled together to form a strap to secure the mess tin. This was placed around the center of the greatcoat and around the belt. The mess tin was placed on top of the greatcoat and buckled in accordingly, using the securing points made available on the mess tin cover. You will at once notice the similarities in this arrangement with the later 1888 or Slade Wallace equipment. Like its predecessors, the 82 pattern equipment could be worn in a number of ways. Review order was with the waist belt and bayonet and a single ammunition pouch worn in the center of the back, unless ammunition was either carried or another article such as the cape carried at the back, in which case the pouch was moved to the front right. In field day order, the belt, bayonet, and one pouch was worn at the right front. The haversack and water bottle were necessary additions to sustain the man during his time in the field, and they were worn in the usual fashion. In marching order, the complete set was worn, with water bottle and haversack. This was not typically worn on active service, the valise then being carried in unit transport, but it was worn commonly on home service. As mentioned, when on campaign, the valise was not typically worn. In this case, the braces were repositioned through the loops on the belt, thereby supporting the greatcoat and mess tin mounted at the rear of the set. Configured this way, this is perhaps the earliest example of what we would now consider to be a typical set of infantry equipment. My set of 82 pattern equipment came by chance for sale at an incredibly reasonable price from Track of the Wolf. Indeed, it was advertised as a set of P71, and I immediately jumped on it. Like my 71 set though, it was not perfect, and I felt I needed to make some modifications to bring it closer to the historical. For more information about the 82 pattern valise equipment, please see the video published earlier on the subject. As viewers of the channel may now know, I've come to rely heavily on Pierre Turner's book, Soldiers' Accoutrements of the British Army. Like most of the equipment featured on the channel, the 1871 and the 1882 set have both gone through extensive modification to bring them more in line with the historical. New pouches, new belts, the construction outright of valises for all the sets, work that has been undertaken using the drawings contained in the book. To date, this is by far the most important reference for kit featured on the channel. Many years ago, when I was first introduced to Victorian infantry equipment, it was an Osprey title, British Infantry Equipments from 1808 to 1908, authored and illustrated by Mike Chappell, that formed a key reference. Containing all kinds of interesting bits of information and wonderfully illustrated in true Osprey style, it nevertheless contained a passage that I've come to learn as being perhaps slightly inaccurate. In the text, he mentioned that the 82 set was essentially just a modification of the 71 set. Now, conceptually it may be, but he went on to say that most of the work to convert the old to the new was done at regimental level. In the book, this passage is unreferenced. After examining and indeed making many of the items of both these sets, I can safely say that this cannot be the case. The 82 set is, as it was, a standalone set, not merely a modification of an earlier pattern. Its various elements are similar, but yet completely different in construction and dimensions. The 82 set is no modification of the 71. Sadly, this claim survived the updated version, printed in the early 2000s. The books are still, however, very useful, and the illustrations within are of top quality. So this brings us to the end of Part 4. In Part 5, we'll discuss the two remaining sets of equipment used on the channel, the 1888 or Slade Wallace valise equipment, and the 1908 pattern webbing as used in the early stages of the Great War. If you'd like to support the channel, please stop by our Patreon page. The link is in the description below.